This wasn't a raid. When the Vikings stopped leaving. For centuries, Europe believed one comforting lie about the Vikings. They came, they burned, they left, like a storm, terrifying, but temporary. You hid, you waited, and eventually, the sea went quiet again. That pattern made the Vikings survivable. It turned terror into something you could explain. Until one year, the sea didn't empty. In 865 AD, England waited for the raid to end. The bells rang, the fires burned, the screams faded, villages smoldered, churches stood blackened and hollow, and still, the ship stayed anchored, not drifting, not retreating, staying. Days passed, then weeks. Fishermen watched the horizon every morning, expecting the sails to vanish with the tide. They didn't. Slowly, a truth spread inland, whisper by whisper like smoke under a door. This wasn't a raid. It was an arrival. Before that moment, Viking warfare followed rules. Fast attacks, small crews, maximum fear, minimum risk. A longship could appear before sunrise, strike by morning, and be gone by noon. The sea was their escape route, not their home. They avoided armies because armies were slow and costly. They avoided kings because kings brought walls and consequences. They avoided walls because walls turned quick profit into months of blood. Gold was easier than conquest. Silver didn't fight back. Europe adapted to that threat. Monasteries moved inland. Relics were buried beneath stone floors. The richest churches stopped wearing their gold in daylight. Church bells became early warning systems. Metal screams that meant run. Villagers learned to read the horizon like fishermen read weather. A dark shape at the wrong hour could mean death by nightfall. Kings promised protection. They raised taxes, built wooden palisades, swore the Viking problem was managed. Some even claimed they understood Vikings now, greedy, violent, predictable. People wanted to believe that, because believing was easier than imagining something worse. What England didn't understand was this: a raid is a question, an invasion is an answer, and no one imagined the Vikings would change the rules. In the autumn of 865, England's coast darkened, not with clouds, with sails. At first it looked familiar, a few black marks on the horizon, then more again, until the sea itself felt crowded. Hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors. Some men tried to count them. They stopped. Because when you can't count a threat, your mind stops treating it as an event and starts treating it as fate. If you stood on the cliffs that morning, the horizon wouldn't look like open water. It would look like a wall, a forest of masts, a line of black sails so dense it stole the light from the waves. And then the landing began. Shields, axes, boots in wet sand. But that still wasn't the most frightening part. Behind the warriors came wagons, livestock, tools, chests, families, children. A mother stepping onto foreign shore with a child on her hip is not planning a raid. She's planning a life. You don't bring plows for loot. You bring them when you intend to stay long enough for spring. This wasn't an army chasing treasure. This was a people dragging their future ashore. And England's body understood it before England's mind did. Men stopped sleeping. Dogs barked at nothing. And every rumor sounded true. The chronicles gave it a name, the Great Heathen Army. Not because it was pagan. England had faced pagans for decades, but because it felt wrong, too large, too organized, too patient. Raiders burned fast and left. This army burned slowly and waited. It camped through storms, stayed through winter, watched the land like a predator watches a field. To the English, that patience was terrifying. It meant the Vikings weren't desperate. They weren't improvising. They had a plan that stretched beyond a single season. And at the center of that plan was a name that traveled faster than the army itself: Ivar the Boneless. No one agreed what the name meant. Some said his bones were weak. Others said he moved like liquid, too flexible, too strange. Some whispered he wasn't built like other men at all. But here is what truly frightened England. Ivar didn't fight like a warrior. He didn't rush walls, didn't charge shields, didn't need the heroic moment. He waited. Ivar understood something no king in England did. You don't conquer land by killing soldiers. You conquer land by breaking certainty. He attacked harvests, winter stores, morale. Sometimes he didn't burn the town, he burned the grain. Because a village can rebuild a house, it cannot rebuild a winter. He punished resistance publicly, not for cruelty, for memory, so that defiance would feel pointless long after the blood was gone. And sometimes, he didn't attack at all. No horns, no ladders, no assault, just Viking fires in the distance, just quiet, just rumors. They are 10,000. They don't bargain. They take sons and return them as enemies. You can deny a sword at your throat. You can't deny a thought in your head. And fear doesn't just spread, it restructures people. Inside the walls, neighbors became watchers, friends became informants, leaders became targets. One town, one night. A father lifts his child off the floor when the bell rings, not because he understands the danger, but because his body does. He doesn't ask, will they attack? He asks, where do we run? And when a people start thinking in exits, the war is already won. Because the moment you stop imagining victory, you start negotiating surrender. And when the gates finally opened, the city had already surrendered. Then came York, a city that trusted its walls, trusted its kings, trusted that fear could be managed. The army arrived. The kings argued, not about defense, about pride. Who would lead? Who would be remembered? Who would be blamed? While they argued, the Vikings waited. The people panicked. Food was counted, doors were barred, prayers were whispered like secrets. And the most dangerous enemy wasn't outside the walls. It was inside them. Because fear creates its own traitors. The gates opened from the inside. That is the moment history turns. Not when the first arrow flies, when the hinge moves. York fell, not to siege, but to terror. 2 kings died, 1 city vanished, and England learned something it would never forget. Walls mean nothing if terror enters first. This was no longer war, it was occupation. Kings who resisted were killed. Kings who submitted were spared. As puppets, a crown could stay on a head as long as the hands that controlled it belonged to someone else. Tribute replaced taxes. Villages paid silver, grain, livestock, whatever kept the wolves from the door. Hostages replaced loyalty. Because if you hold a noble child, you hold a kingdom by the throat, and the army didn't leave after winter. That should have been the moment England understood the old rules were dead. Instead, England waited for the storm to pass, but the Vikings built camps. They repaired ships, mapped roads, learned rivers, stored food like people who planned to be alive here next year. And they waited. Occupation is quieter than war, but it is heavier. A raid takes your gold. Occupation takes your choices. English armies disbanded after harvest. Men went home to survive the cold. That was the rhythm of the year. The Vikings didn't follow that rhythm. They attacked when food was gone, when morale collapsed, when hope froze. Winter wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. A village in summer can hide. A village in winter is trapped in its own smoke. England wasn't bleeding in one great battle. It was bleeding slowly. A burned granary here, a taken son there, a lord who surrendered because his people were starving. Each surrender made the next one easier. Only one man understood what was happening, Alfred of Wessex. He didn't win. He ran. He hid in marshes, watched villages burn. And then he did something unthinkable. He studied the Vikings, copied them, learned their movement, their timing, their cruelty, not just tactics, mindset, the part that hurts to admit, because copying an enemy is not a victory, it's a confession. It means your old world failed. It means your pride is a luxury you can't afford. Alfred learned that survival sometimes means becoming what you hate, and England's future was forged by imitating its enemy. Eventually, England split, one half under Saxon law, one half under Viking rule. The Danelaw, the Great Heathen Army, stopped marching because it no longer needed to. It had reshaped the land. Language changed, culture merged. England was no longer England. But here's the final irony. The Vikings stayed. They farmed, they settled, they ruled, and slowly, they softened. The fire that made them unstoppable faded because permanence weakens conquerors. A raider lives on hunger and motion. A ruler lives on stability, and stability dulls the blade. 12 empires don't fall when attacked. They fall when they fail to adapt. The greatest threats aren't the ones that strike and leave. They are the ones that arrive quietly and stay. The Great Heathen Army is gone. Their ships are dust, their names half legend. But the world they reshaped still exists, because in 865 AD, the Vikings didn't raid England. They rewrote it. The sea went quiet again, but history never did.